Hello, my name is Ya Baker, and I'm going to be doing my presentation on Church World Service Durham and how its efforts affect the Durham community. So here we go. This is my photo essay. In this presentation, I'm just going to show my photos. The essay itself will also be shared with you. There you can find some more statistics and sort of things you can find on the website. I would say that for this presentation, I'm going to go more into social consequences and how what I learned about Church World Service or CWS Durham ties into what we've been learning throughout the school year. So right now, CWS Durham is still very active, but obviously they are having to negotiate the corona pandemic just like everybody else. A big way that they're doing that is they're sharing materials and government mandates, government advices to their clients. They're doing this in so many different languages. Whatever language the client needs, they either have materials for them or they can get them translated. This really ties into the theme of resilience that we've been talking about throughout the year. Yes, Corona came. Yes, there's a pandemic, but CWS Durham continues to find ways to serve its clients. Most of its programs have not stopped. In fact, many of them are online. The only one that has stopped is, of course, intake processes. This is so important because it means that Durham community is still going, at least this one aspect, but I would say Durham in general is. And because of their efforts to educate people about COVID-19, the health of our overall society is better for it. If one person is sick, other people are at risk of becoming sick as well. In the midst of the pandemic, like I said before, the intake process has completely stopped. People are not traveling right now. So the front lines of CWS Durham has become the employment service team. Right now, the economy is definitely in trouble. Lots of people are losing their jobs, but also a lot of companies are hiring right now. Many service jobs are not filled, and people need to buy groceries. People need to have things delivered. So the employment service team is really working hard at this moment. Not only are they trying to help people get benefits from the government in this difficult economic time, but they're also trying to help people apply for jobs. This is one of the few times where employment services are being strained from both ends of their job, both the unemployment and the becoming employed sides of their responsibilities. And they're doing it with such grace. And this is so beneficial to the Durham community because what they're doing is they're keeping people working. They're keeping some level of money exchange, of money flow within the community. So this definitely has affected Durham community members outside of the refugee population. This really ties into what Professor was talking about in his article that we read at the beginning of the school year about refugees and jobs. Yes, there are benefits to refugees sort of waiting and not having jobs, but one of the benefits to the larger community of refugees coming in and hitting the ground running is it contributes to the economy. And so not only are refugees being helped, but also the already present members of the community that they're entering. Walking with the Bulls. So there is an annual Cop Out Hunger walk that happens nationwide. It's funded by CWS USA. And one of the locations where this event happens is Durham. CWS Durham is not as directly affiliated with it in the sense of they don't directly plan it. This is more their church affiliates that take responsibility for that, but of course they support it. And this is one of their events that had to change in the midst of COVID-19. And the way that this happened is they did not gather at Duke University, which is where it normally would be, and go for a walk in a mass. Instead, people walked on trails where they could practice social distancing. They volunteered virtually, or they did other types of fundraising. This event this year and all years is so loved by the Durham community. It's an opportunity for Durhamites to come together and invest in each other, invest in the community as a whole, as a team. And of course, it promotes exercise and healthy lifestyle. This really ties into what Professor was talking about in terms of making roots in a place. And we're going to touch on that a little bit more later. But when a person considers their placement as their new home versus their patria as a place that they will one day go to, through this event, members of the Durham community are investing in other members of the Durham community, including refugees, as this is not only my home, but your home, and we're sharing it. So that is just a beautiful thing that happens, and part of the reason why this event is so loved. One thing that has not changed throughout the pandemic are English classes. English classes are still being offered. They're offered virtually now, but they are still being offered. And I think this is a great opportunity to look at the theme of adaptability within CWS Durham in the same way that we've been looking at it throughout this semester. So what's really interesting about the English classes this right now that are happening during the pandemic is they are just as rigorous, if not more rigorous than they usually are, because people are staying home. People in many cases are not working, so they have more time on their hands to practice and to get better at English, which according to the director of volunteers at CWS Durham, who I interviewed, is the most basic skill. And we've been studying this all semester. This isn't only important for job acquisition and participating in society, but it's also important in terms of family units, making sure that all members of families can communicate with each other, sort of like how the guest speaker from St. Mary's mentioned to us about how younger members of families are more fluent in English, whereas older members of families are more fluent in other languages, and there's a communication gap, or even how there's role inversions within families due to different understandings of languages. So for people to have the agency to communicate in English themselves, but then also perhaps communicate with their children in English who might not know their native tongue, the native tongue of their parents. These English classes are really useful to not only individuals in the family networks, but the community at large, because healthy families make healthy communities. So when COVID-19 is not running rampant, there are intake processes that CWS participates in. They welcome every client with an apartment, with a home-cooked meal, with groceries for quite some time, a few days or so, furniture, and other home goods. This is really important because even though people are coming into the US and is a completely strange environment, it offers some sort of comfort. It offers a sense of welcome. It also takes away the anxiety of where am I going to eat? They have a few days worth of food, so that calms things down as well. And it works as a stepping stool for them to become productive members of society, so they're not just starting at zero. And this is really interesting because it ties into something that Professor Bessman spoke about in her book of refugees being treated as docile. CWS Durham does not accept donations for apartments that are torn, that are stained, that aren't quality. They want every one of their clients to feel that they have dignity and feel that they have agency. When one of their clients decides something, that decision is what goes. They're not going to force them to do anything. And through this strategy, through this philosophy, CWS Durham has helped to resettle over 2,000 people. Now, this statistic is a bit outdated. It is significantly higher than 2,000, but this is what is on the website, and it is the most credible number. So it is over 2,000. So once people are in the United States, once they are in Durham, of course, they're going to experience culture shocks. People experience culture shock coming from Raleigh to Durham. So coming from an entirely different country, there is an orientation that needs to be had. So the federal government does mandate there be an orientation just to go through different cultural norms, but this can be very overwhelming, and it's not the most effective way to teach anyone about culture. And so what CWS Durham does, is they actually have weekly classes that focus on different topics. They have women's groups, they talk about finances and budgeting, they talk about, greeting people, just all types of things that someone would need to know to fit into the culture of Durham. And one thing that the director of volunteers really emphasized to me when I was speaking with him is that culture is taught in a way that is dignified. So they're not trying to put down anyone's cultural background. They're simply saying, this is the culture in Durham, North Carolina. And he also said that there are cultural clashes that they have to negotiate. And this was a theme that wasn't just brought up by him, but we've been talking about that, especially in St. John's book. Cultural clashes is something that's almost inevitable when there's diversity. And when you have people coming from so many different countries and entering Durham, that's absolutely going to happen. And I would just like to sort of make an equivalent. Durham is by no means as far south as Clarkston, Georgia, and it also has universities in it. However, it is a southern city. This is not a place where the Confederacy was never a thing. This is not a place where the KKK does not exist. So these are topics that have to be navigated and themes that have to be taught to people who are moving to Durham, because they're going to have to navigate it. So in addition to cultural orientation courses, there's also leadership workshops that CWS Durham offers. Trainings that encourage members to be leaders of their own community, that encourage clients to be leaders of their own community and to advocate for themselves. So the idea is that they can use the cultural capital that they gained from the cultural orientation courses and apply it to being able to advocate for themselves and for their own cultural backgrounds, this helps the community have a more mosaic model, sort of like what we were talking about. How do you use capital? How do you turn it into other types of capital? This is cultural capital, but it can be used to turn into other types of capital. And then in this case, cultural capital can be spent to create a mosaic model, instead of say, assimilation model or a melting pot model. And so while people are advocating for themselves, they're not necessarily alone. So, of course, in today's time, not just limited to Durham, but on a federal level, a lot of laws and a lot of resources are changing, especially in how they pertain to refugees. So it's very important that people know how to advocate for themselves in this space, but it's also important that they have experts to help them out. So CWS Durham does offer legal services. It is not a free clinic, but it is highly subsidized. And this just helps people to have more legal knowledge and be able to navigate that space a bit better. And this ties into a reading that I had when I was actually writing my first essay by Kennedy, and is called Crafting Citizens, Resettlement Agencies and Refugee Incorporation in the U.S. In the U.S. A lot of refugees have an experience of being anxious regarding American law and breaking it, and what does it mean, and do they know it? And sometimes they think that laws are laws that are not laws. So this just gives people the opportunity to know a bit more about the laws in their new home. And I said that we were going to go back to people feeling that where they were placed is their long-term home. So the focuses of the legal services that CWS Durham offers are residency, citizenship, and family reunification. All of those things and all of those themes very much emphasize permanency, setting roots in Durham, or at least in the US, saying, I want to know legal aspects of my residency. I want to become a citizen. I want my family to be here with me. Those are all elements of permanency, or at least longevity of some sort. Okay. So we talked about all of these different resources that CWS offers to its clients. One of the major ones is actually case managers. So every client has a case manager. This is going to change at different points in their lives depending on what they need. Case managers are the people who help them get the needs that they have, right? And who their case manager is at what point in their life depends on what their needs are at that time. In this picture, we have Zita, who was a client of CWS Durham, her daughter Divine, who's the older daughter, and then her baby girl Samantha. Zita's caseworker was such an influential part of her life and supported her so much that she actually named her daughter Samantha after her. So caseworkers are really beneficial because they uplift the clients and the Durham community members. And when you have strong community members with strong family units who are supported by case managers, both with their mental health, their physical health, their education needs, it really benefits the society as a whole, because ultimately we're only as strong as our weakest link. And then finally, religion. So officially, Church World Service is a church world service. It was founded in the 1940s by a collection of churches And it was founded on Christian principles of love thy neighbor and help the stranger because they are your neighbor, even if they are not your brother or sister in Christ. CWS Durham does not focus on that Christian element as much. They do work with faith groups and faith organizations, but they do that from many different faith groups. One of their major faith groups that helps them out is the Judea Reform Group, which is a Jewish organization in Durham. Instead of focusing on religion, four principles that they sort of place as a higher priority than Christianity are confidentiality, acceptance, sustainability, and empowerment. So the national organization is still a Christian organization, it still has Christian values, it still has a Christian history that it acknowledges. CWS Durham specifically does not emphasize that background. Instead, they emphasize those four principles, and then they also build interfaith relationships to help them serve their clients, which is very beneficial for Durham's community at large because it builds connections with people and with community members that cross religious lines. So that is my presentation. All of my citations are in the essay itself, which is a Word document that will be uploaded along with this presentation. And this is just a brief description of how Church World Service Durham has been a beneficial organization, not only to its clients who are Durham community members, but to the Durham community as a whole.